Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Feeling Seen, the podcast that talks about the movies that make us feel seen. My co-host for today is I'm going to say a queer indie cinema, this is like an insurgent kind of icon that we have on the show with us today. You might know her work from Lyle, the fantastic, breezy, really, it's about an hour-long thriller starring Gabby Hoffman that has been dubbed the queer Rosemary's Baby, if you want to elevator pitch it. Her new film, Bad Things, of which she's also the writer-director, is on the eve of release now. Stewart Thorndike, welcome to the show. What else do the people need to know about you before we get started? I know you have a background in, fine arts and photography. What other capsule information should we lead with for the people?
I mean, I don't know how to add to insurgent icon. My God.
I like the way you talk about your movies. I like your movies. It just feels, Lyle feels like a movie that arrived pre an era of genre cinema, crossing between art house and mainstream explosion, like the rising tide lifting all the boats. It feels like it was a precursor to one of those things where it's like, hey guys, do you know that all of this cool shit exists that you can enjoy and it's not just slashers? So I feel like you're a table setter for the horror boom that came just a few years after Lyle arrived.
Well, thank you so much for that. That is really meaningful to hear because it was a battle to make the kind of films that I want to make.
Yeah.
I had been interested in horror since I was, a little kid. And in fact, the task of picking the project where you feel seen, my immediate stuff was probably horror, but I wanted to sidestep that and bring something else to the table that was maybe came to me later in life. But people thought it was lowbrow. I went to grad school for film and there was not support for what I wanted to do. And I feel like there was always support in the world for boys to tell bold stories, but women were meant to tell stories that were maybe subtle and beautiful and important and healing. So
healing.
So it means a lot to have you point that out.
Of course, yeah. And there's such a... I am of the mind that the kind of the horror explosion that happened following, I think, the combination of your Witch, your It Follows, your Goodnight Mommy coming together with the arrival of Get Out and opening people's eyes to the depth and breadth of what horror cinema could be. There is this sort of what I see as a sort of decade prior to me that kind of starts with a 2009 space of Let the Right One In, an international art house horror, and then a Jennifer's Body Teeth situation, American neo-exploitation in the late aughts, that's seeding the ground for hey guys, there's more going on here than you think there is. And as things got, more democratized in various digital distribution channels and you could just access things from all over the world and all over sort of the record crates kind of style, digging through, finding your hidden gems, I feel like that brought so much more to people right at a time when a Get Out arrives to be like, hey, whole world, did you know there's a lot going on here? But by that time, obviously there's a whole century of horror cinema to discover once people kind of get there. But I think there is this sort of 10-year period prior to the boom of the late 2010s, where it's all this fertile soil is being tilled that then grew forth, and people could be like, hey, would you like to see the yield of the last decade that you can access that will take you into a prior century of horror cinema education?
Right. I think, I might even look at it almost a little differently than that, in reverse of what you said, because I almost think there was just a blip of bad horror. Because
okay, fair.
Yeah.
Okay, I like this. I like this take.
Boys took over the genre and they kind of blended it up with the most base, misogynistic, simple storytelling that you could do, which is the slasher film and that franchise of a certain film. And because those films were ugly and terrible to women. I mean, not all of them. I'm a big fan of a couple of them, but people turned away from them and didn't understand that horror has always been an important place for marginalized people and for artistic exploration.
But to the you of it all, for what brings us here today, I will start with a bit of bad things because, like you were saying, just like what it takes to make a movie that you feel like that you can believe in and make it the way you want to make it. I was reading an interview that you did about Lyle in 2014, where you explain like a next project that you're working on, where you lay out the plot of Bad Things. And this is 2014. You're like, it's a haunted TED Talk. And you talk about these friends going to a hotel. And that is 2014. That is 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago.
Yeah.
And here we are now talking about the arrival and release of Bad Things. That's nuts.
Yeah, that's the pain. That's the battle. I was ready to make this that year. I have my other project that was Daughter. You know, Lyle's the first of a trilogy about motherhood. And Bad Things was the second, and Daughter is the third. And they were all ready to go. Like, I finished Bad Things in 2014, I believe. And was trying to shoot it right away. And then with Daughter, I wrote it the following year. So, as a queer woman making nutritious, thoughtful, artful, personal horror, it hasn't been easy, but it's so many wonderful films are out there making it way more fertile for these kinds of stories and opportunities, I hope.
I'm so glad you bring that up because I was reading an article like published through New Fest. It was an interview with you. And that was the one where you talked about, you basically lined out Bad Things. And the interviewer asks you, are we moving toward more normalized films where sexuality doesn't serve a social purpose, but rather functions like a narrative tapestry? And it's interesting, like, reading that question posed to you in 2014 and being here in 2020 with the same movie that you're talking about doing next. But I feel like in the way that sort of ambient queerness, as I kind of describe it, has sort of caught up as becoming more normalized. Like, your answer at the time was, I hope so. And I also, like, part of your answer was, like, I don't relate to the experience of it being hard being queer. Like, I know that's a huge part of it, like, but, like, that's not my thing. So, like, when I tell stories, it's not with queer people, they're not going to revolve around everybody talking about their sexuality all the time and, like, headlining, like, so we're queer. It's queer. Queer things are happening in our queer lives.
Exactly.
And do you feel now with that 9-year removal that ambient queerness that you just imbue into your work, of people just living their lives and an experience who live of an experience similar to yours, do you feel like that is now of a part of a larger entry of films in the cinema community, or do you still feel like an outlier?
I never really felt like an outlier because I didn't think about it like that. You know, it's part of like having the conversation of making art as you start hearing, oh, other women aren't making horror, and it's a weird thing that I'm not making a movie about how hard it is to be gay. But you know where I see a new generation that's really comfortable with their queerness and any kind of sexual identity that they are is in just young people now. Yeah. It's like a leap forward, because I teach and it feels just wonderful to be around young people. They just, at least awesome. They just don't have the same kind of second guessing, and they're just way ahead. So that is really exciting. And so, there's all sorts of corners to queerness. And I love the idea. Some of my students talk about living in between spaces and,
God, the language that they have and know now, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. And it's just, there's so many stories that need to be explored still. It's basically just bringing different people to the table.
Yeah. Yeah. That extremely out of the box thinking. Yeah. Well, we're going to get into the centerpiece of the conversation. There are white straight men present, but in quite the skewering of sort of convention and politeness and the way of things with the character that you have brought, which is the sort of lead character of Beverly in the movie Abigail's Party. How did you alight upon this choice?
Well, I had a really hard time picking something because so many films have had such a big, big injection into my bloodstream and,
Mm.
have, just being like my religion in some ways.
Mm.
And a lot of my first connections, I feel like a lot of people, they naturally go to something when they were young, where
Mm-hmm.
they first, had that feeling of a connection to something. And I guess for me, that was horror. So there were a lot of
Mm-hmm.
places, or like Twilight Zones or melodramas. But I think I remembered Abigail's Party as being this big deal for me in my early 20s
Mm-hmm.
because it was funny and I loved her.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt a huge connection to the comedy of it. So
Mm-hmm.
more than I feel seen by her, I felt seen by her as an actor and
Okay.
her
Okay.
as in part of this world. The Mike Lee comedy, I guess.
Yeah, it's the filmed version, correct, of Mike Lee's stage play, Abigail's Party. And we enter a situation where we are at Beverly and Lawrence's house and they're preparing to entertain for the evening.
You're gonna get changed.
Oh, yes. I'll drink this, I'll get changed, and then I'll go out.
And don't forget those lagers.
Beverly, where are the olives?
In the kitchen, Lawrence. Lawrence, if you want olives, would you put them out, please?
Oh, no. They're early, aren't they?
No, they're not. And you're not changed.
Yes, I know that.
And it feels like, as it goes, like, it's kind of like it feels like a sort of comedy of manners and lack of manners that sort of descends into feeling like almost like a Buñuel film, like a Louis Buñuel film, like The Exterminating Angel, where you're watching these people just sort of tracked by convention and their circumstances and just devolving into a kind of madness as the night goes on. And all the while throughout the evening, Beverly is like emasculating her husband, but like with a wink, and she's plying everyone just more drinks, more drinks, more drinks.
Now then, Sue, let's see. What would you like to drink?
Oh, I'll have a glass of sherry, please.
A glass of sherry? Are you sure?
Yes, thank you.
Because we've got everything. There's gin, whiskey, brandy, vodka, whatever you'd like. Would you like a little gin and tonic, Sue? Because me and Ange are drinking gin and tonic, actually.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ice and lemon.
Yes, please.
Right.
She's like the most, I feel like if you imagine the most like meddling, sort of overbearing mom type, but who's also like not really involved in your life, but just has opinions about how you should do every little thing. That felt like Beverly. And just like her physical posture of how she moves through the space, like kind of like tight and buttoned up at all times, but also feeling like a sort of a lush. And I was watching this being like, I love that Stewart was like, I'm going to get into Beverly.
Oh, yeah.
For this examination. What was it about the performance for you that you really latched onto?
Well, she's kind of terrifying, I guess, but I adore it. I like bad women. I can't help it.
Yeah.
And I like how she's treacherous and I like pretension. I like that she's delusional. I like that she has a vision. She wants to throw a classy party. She wants glamour. And she's hungry. And just the second she walks into the screen, like the movie opens, it's not even a movie. Mike Lee doesn't call it a movie, but that she walks into her house and she moves through it like a panther. And she's got this fantastic dress on and she's playing Love to Love You Baby. It's not Donna Summer. It's a cover of it, but and she's just
And that song is going for like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
That song's going for like 10 minutes.
Yeah, she's just incredible to watch.
It's my dream, actually, just to lie on a beach sipping Bacardi and Coke.
Have you always had a moustache?
What do you mean?
Have you had it for a few years?
Yes.
Never thought of having a beard to go with it?
No.
No, Lawrence wouldn't suit a beard, Ange. His face is too small.
I was in from that second on. There's certain actresses, certain actors that really just I feel this big connection to. She's one of them, like in this role for sure.
And that is it Allison Steadman?
Yeah. I think she was married to Mike Lee for a long time. And so it's kind of campy. Mm-hmm. And there's this sense of dread that's happening through the film. And I think that, and there's an ensemble to it. And I think a lot of the work that I do is managing characters like this. And I love this like kind of naturalistic performance that also has a heightened to it. Like it's kind of like a campy realism or something. So I tend to write characters like that in my script. I like to push a little, which I think is why I like horrors. I like the aesthetics that you can bring to those altered spaces and pushing characters a little bit.
Well, and this is one of those movies where, like, with the boom of the late 10s, there has been this sort of, well, what is horror? What defines horror? Well, is it really horror? And I feel like this, like, if this dropped into the ecosystem right now, it would be one of those ones that gets sort of captured under the horror umbrella and plays at something like a Fantastic Fest.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
Because of the arc that it goes through, where, like, you know, it's clearly a drama, it's clearly a stage play, but it's also it's a dark comedy. But you're watching it, and the way that it comes unglued at the end, like, if horror is rooted around a movie that is, like, about discomfort and then ends in catastrophe or tragedy, I'm like, well, you know, I feel like we can put this alongside the sort of Ari Aster pieces in our conversation.
Mind you, Sue, he's brought this on himself. I'm sorry, Sue, but he has. Sue, if you knew the number of times I have pleaded with him to take a day off and rest, and he wouldn't listen to me, Sue. He wouldn't take any notice of me. And you know why? Because basically he is stubborn and he's pig-headed.
I did read some reviews before we talked, and they were all done by dudes. And I kind of resent that people think of her as being just this terror, because I think she's also trying to pull people along in the party, and she has like a fantasy. And I think of all these, you know, a lot of times we see, like, this is 3 different women, and they're all dealing with what they've been giving in the world in the 70s, and men, you know, so you've got one who's married to you know, kind of a wimpy guy who doesn't want to get into like her cultural ambition. Yeah. And then you've got another one who's got like an abusive guy who they're all kind of this, you know, some of the lines that Angie says about her husband saying he wants to tape her mouth shut. Yeah. And like, oh, but you know, I still would miss him if he was gone. And they're like, oh, does he get violent sometimes? Do you want another drink?
Is he very violent?
No, he's not violent. He's just a bit nasty. Like the other day, he said to me he'd like to sellotape my mouth. No, Ange. And that's not very nice, is it?
It certainly isn't, Ange. It certainly isn't.
Was your husband violent?
Oh, no, not at all.
Oh, she's one of the lucky ones, isn't she?
Definitely so, yeah, definitely.
Mind you, if Tony wasn't around, I'd miss him.
Would you? Yeah. Funny, isn't it?
And it's like, for me, that's more interesting than a woman who's abused by her husband and wants to get away from him. Because it kind of steps over all the complexity of why women stay in those kind of relationships. And then you've got the woman who's just recently divorced and is kind of just like still trying to figure out what went wrong, I get the feeling, and she's just being abandoned, sort of. So I love that I think of it as a feminist film, and, you know, Beverly is playing by the rules that were given to her. And she, you know, is it bad that she wants that little slice, a little more of her social climbing and some glamour in the mix?
Well, and a thing I was thinking about while I was watching, because like I was reading you, I think it was an interview with Filmmaker Magazine, you were talking about your movie Bad Things as being like a space where, you know, for women to really descend into sort of the darkest aspects of their nature, and like just putting them in this playpen that is this essentially, like, it looks kind of like an abandoned hotel. It's closed down at the moment, but it's like, you know, there are a few things scarier than a hotel that's not operational. Like, that's just like, that's a haunted idea. But what I was thinking while I was watching that in consideration with this movie was when the male character, like the one male character, enters the film for the first time, there's like, it's like a record scratch moment where each of these four women, it's kind of like like, what's he doing? What is a he doing here right now? Like, this is a violation of the space. And like they're talking when he leaves, they're like, yeah, I hate guys like that just like patronizing but flirting with you. And then Hari Nef has that great line delivery where she's just like, he reminds me of every single man that I've ever met. Like, just like every Brian, yeah, we're all lumped into, like, I think every man I've ever met is exactly the same kind of, like, I don't know, I stopped telling, they're all one blurry Chad at this point. And I felt like what I was watching despite like the presence of Tony and Lawrence in Abigail's Party, it felt like a movie where it was two universes of women where there is a language and experience gap between them and men, such that men in their space feels like something that is wrong to them. And in your film, in Bad Things, they're like, can you go? But in Abigail's Party, bound by the convention of its 1970s, it seems like it's London, and they just like have to abide these interlopers into their spaces to have the lives that they want. And I wanted to hear from you about that sort of comprehension gap between these universes of men and women and how you sort of recognize that, or if that's something consciously that's in your work.
Well, I grew up with women and I like women best. And
Same.
I can never write about dudes. I don't know. I'm not interested. They seem like they have smaller interior lives. And I'm more hot for women. And so that's where my brain goes, is what are women up to? And I like
women up to.
And I want to just kind of, I like the idea of stepping away from the man's world and then just seeing what happens. So I'm not even really thinking about them. You know, I think Abigail's Party really is like trying to have these female experiences, and then there's these kind of guys and they try and send them away, and then they come back and they're kind of messing with the dynamics and stuff.
Yeah.
But my film is more like they go to places that men don't, like a city of women.
Yeah.
And that's natural for me too. That's just a natural place for my brain to wander in and to be creative in. So it's not like I set out in an academic way. It's not like an academic pursuit for me. It's just maybe just natural.
How is it, like, when you've been working on something for so long, like with Bad Things, like knowing that it will arrive in the world that it arrives in, regardless of the world that existed when you started writing it? Like, how often do you find yourself surprised by interpretations of your own work once it leaves your hands and starts to belong to everybody else, and then they start asking you about it?
Well, definitely with Lyle, it was radical because I just didn't know the reaction that I would get from the world for making a horror film. I didn't, okay. I knew that people like in my circles didn't think of it as high art, but I didn't know it was such a big deal to be a woman making horror. And was that, wait, ask me the question again. I was focused on. I
was wondering how often do you find yourself surprised by the interpretation of your own work once it stops belonging solely to you and the people who made it and becomes the possession of everyone who gets to see it?
Well, I think that's just always the most exciting thing because I'm delighted that it takes on different forms. Someone was just talking about how they're writing a book on capitalism and horror, and they're writing about Lyle. And
oh, cool! I
was like, oh yeah, like the Brooklyn brownstone dream and what you would give for that. So I think with Lyle, it was my reaction to it was more intense because it caught me by surprise, but now I really love it and welcome it. And it's one of the exciting parts about being an artist is that conversation that you get to like have.
Well, I think that, like, into the notion of, like, feeling seen, like, when, you know, talking about Abigail's Party and you saying, like, you know, like, to me, this is a feminist film. And I'm not saying Mike Leigh didn't intend for that, but, like, the notion of, like, cinema belonging to each individual person and what you can make of it, I don't think it makes the creator's intentions irrelevant, but kind of if a shitty person made something and I don't agree with their intention for their work, and I'm like, no, actually I took this and made this mine years ago, like, I think that is one of the most beautiful parts of being a less represented person on screen, is the constant creative exercise that you're sharpening in your mind to put yourself places where you previously didn't exist or are fully not invited.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And I think it's what's exciting about making art.
We're going to take a quick break. We will be back shortly with more from Stewart Thorndike. And then at the end, you will get one quick thing before I go about the lovely little movie you should, you know, go see if you can find it in a theater. Watch it at home if you can't. We're going to talk a little bit about theater camp, so stay tuned.
I'm Yucky Jessica.
I'm Chuck Crudsworth.
And this is Terrible,
a podcast where we talk about things we hate that are awful.
Today we're discussing Wonderful, a podcast on the Maximum Fun Network.
Hosts Rachel and Griffin McElroy, a real-life married couple,
Yuck.
discuss a wide range of topics: music, video games, poetry, snacks.
But I hate all that stuff.
I know you do, Yucky Jessica.
It comes out every Wednesday, the worst day of the week, wherever you download your podcasts.
For our next topic, we're talking Fiona, the baby hippo from the Cincinnati Zoo.
I hate this little hippo.
Hey, when you listen to podcasts, it really just comes down to whether or not you like the sound of everyone's voices. My voice is one of the sounds you'll hear on the podcast Dr. Game Show, and this is the voice of co-host and fearless leader Joe Firestone.
This is a podcast where we play games submitted by listeners, and we play them with callers over Zoom we've never spoken to in our lives. So that is basically the concept of the show. Pretty chill.
So take it or leave it, bucko. And here's what some of the listeners have to say.
It's funny, wholesome, and it never fails to make me smile.
I just started listening and I'm already binging it. I haven't laughed this hard in ages. I wish I discovered it sooner.
You can find Dr. Game Show on MaximumFun.org.
Welcome back to Feeling Seen. My co-host is director Stewart Thorndike. She made a splash with her movie Lyle and has a new film out tomorrow called Bad Things. Bad Things stars Gail Rankin, Hari Neff, Rad Pereira, and Annabelle Dexter-Jones. That'll come up in a minute here, so let's get back to it. I wanted to go back to something that you said earlier, which is like when you were like talking about Beverly and you're like, I love pretension. And I wanted to hear more about that statement and loving pretension and being a cinema fan. And, you know, I've read you describing like the theater house as like kind of a church and films impacting you in such a way to sort of like be almost these like religiously guiding figures for you. Like I wanted to hear about like picking a Mike Leigh film that is almost exclusively available streaming on the Criterion channel and a love of pretension.
Yeah.
Like, in your artistic path with that.
I didn't mean to pick something that's hard to find. It didn't even cross my mind until I sent it off.
Fine.
I think, okay, so some other movies that I love. I liked the character you weren't supposed to like all the time. Like, I liked the Baroness in The Sound of Music. The one who wants to like, and I liked in Little House on the Prairie, I liked Nellie, you know, the bad kid.
Yeah.
And so there's something, I like Madame Bovary. I like women who are entitled and take things and do bad things. And I think I like that delusion and like creating the life you want. So I kind of crave to see more of that, of all the places that women can go. I have never really connected with women who are like self-sacrificing and do the right, you know, or like driven by like a moral code or something. But then I think, you know, your podcast is so interesting because a lot of times like feeling seen, like the idea of finding a character or a film that makes you feel seen also reveals how they're lacking, what you are
absolutely.
in reaction. So it's a difficult task. And I think a lot of movies that had queer or lesbian characters in them maybe didn't give me that, like the full range, but sometimes a comedy or a feeling or a drama can. I love Mulholland Drive because I relate to like the extent and the darkness that her love goes to. And also I would say some pretension there, like the Nancy Drew or at least the illusions, the character side of it. So mainly it was this connection to a certain style of comedy that she could do. I almost picked Parker Posey in Waiting for Guffman.
Guess I could just go back to the Dairy Queen, They said they'd take me back. I always have a place at the Dairy Queen.
I mean, one of the definitive comedies of all time. I watched that, the first time I watched that was with my grandma. And this was when grandma was drinking, so she was in bed a lot. And so grandma was drinking, so grandma was in bed in her silk jammies, and we're watching Waiting for Guffman on the big TV in their room, and Parker Posey fanning like a single chicken thigh on a barbecue on like a Weber grill, blithely talking about how there will always be a place for her at the Dairy Queen. We were sob laughing so hard we had to stop. That we were just rolling with laughter on grandma's bed. That movie, God, gorgeous.
Well, do you know that I acted a tiny bit?
Yes, I know there are a couple credits in there. I know you were in Eyes Wide Shut. You were on a Kubrick set, and I've read you talking about how like I wanted to be Stanley Kubrick when I was on that set. Like that was the takeaway for me.
Yeah, like that's true. But so it did kind of make me study acting for a couple years. But I kept wanting to just be Parker Posey in. Which I'm not Parker Posey, but like that's all I could think of. Like what I would want to act in. Just that one part.
Just that one part. Corky, we love you.
Corky, we love you. We want you to live.
What you say about like not relating to, this notion of like the self-sacrificing and is that in your own life? Do you find that is something that you slide off to the side and decentralize? Or is that like an aspirational kind of identification? Like, I would like to be less self-sacrificing. I would like to be less altruistic or what have you. Or are you like, no, I just don't really prioritize those things in my own life. So when I see characters like that, it feels like a refreshing connection for me.
I mean, I think I'm a good person and I have a 5-year-old and I'm a great mom. I'm like a fun mom. But I'm also just known as being kind of, I don't know if this is true, but sometimes I'm curt or I'm I can say what I mean. In relationships, I'm sometimes called a rock, So I'm just what those things are usually assigned to men.
Yeah.
And even the way I walk around, people say I walk around like a dude. So, and I have ideas about how the world should run. And I think I know, the world according to Stewart. That's why I make films, because I'm trying to prove something. I have a new world order. And so
I did read a quote from you in one article that said, there's one way to do things, and it's my way.
Did I say that?
I was like, yeah. I was like, well, that's a director if ever I've met a director.
Well, I think of it as world building, because you want to just kind of show your experience and, like any art, just prove you're alive. But I think that's it, really, is that it's maybe just not the kind of woman I am.
Do you find that in being responsible for rearing a growing life, how does politeness versus sort of like self-directed energy, like what's the balance of that when it's like, okay, now I gotta tell a kid this, like, and they're gonna go to school and stuff and have like teachers, and I don't know.
I find it quite easy to parent. Like, it hasn't felt like self-sacrifice for me. I think it's fun. But, the complicated things become like, oh, I want to go make a movie now. And I have to. But then I also just make sure that she knows that mommy has dreams and you're going to have dreams, and let's fight to do them. So it hasn't been a conflict in there. It's more of a conflict when it comes to my art and to making things and to how I navigate my sets and compromise and collaboration, and the age-old question of, am I being rude, or am I being, all those terrible things they call women when you're trying to have your perspective get seen, being bossy or shrill or not collaborative enough. Or is that just because I'm a woman?
We need to leave. Okay, you can go if you want to. We'll get you a car. No. All of us need to leave.
Okay, it looks infected.
My fucking leg! Fuck! My fucking leg! Oh my God! We have to leave! Wake up! What the fuck?
What's it like working with Annabelle Dexter-Jones, who's reflexively makes every sort of hair of mine stand on end when I see her on screen? I'm like, you're so shifty. I don't know what you're gonna do.
Oh, I love that. I mean, I think that's why she's perfect for Fran.
Yeah, no, it's great Fran material, it feels like.
And it's interesting that you bring that. Annabelle played the character that I would say is the delicious character that's most similar to Beverly as well. I love those characters, and she's classy like Beverly too. Annabelle Dexter-Jones is just a dynamic, complex, magical actor, and chaos, because it's hard to know. It's hard to know what she's thinking and where she's at and what hurts her and what gives her pain and what makes her happy. And she's enigmatic, and it's really captivating. Like, from the second we sat down for a table read, everybody was like, oh, Annabelle.
And I think now that I'm thinking about it, like with Beverly in Abigail's party, it feels like a distinct thing about that character is that I feel like we have examples of that character, and perhaps more so in outright comedy. I feel like an Absolutely Fabulous, with both of the leads of that show. But I feel like a sort of trick that movie pulls off is that it's an ensemble piece, but it's on the shoulders of the character of Beverly. She's sort of like your point of view character that you're moving with throughout the film, and we don't see that character, especially outside of comedy, as the centerpiece of a movie. They're supporting characters. They're cut, like you mentioned, like the neighbor in Rosemary's Baby, and in this one we have Fran as a supporting element and somebody who's sort of like a weather vane of the entire movie. But it's really, that's a bold swing to be like, and it feels like a thing you can really do in theater, but would be harder to sell on film, and by sell I mean to people who sign checks to make movies, to be like, that's going to be the character that I'm going to put the whole movie on their shoulders, and that's going to be our point of view character, and you're going to go with her as your lead for an entire film. It feels like that gets pushed back, like that kind of woman as your centerpiece.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's hard to give the character the person who's playing the character the lead role. They're usually, because they're harder to design, they're harder to play through. Like, you have to be careful about how wild you make them, because if they're steering the whole ship, you have to be truthful, and you have to land them somewhere with the story that you're trying to tell. And that's harder to do when someone's a little outrageous and they're usually the people you really want to watch too in a film. So it's really cool to see, I'm thinking of other movies when you're talking, it made me think of like, what's that movie with Nicole Kidman, To Die For? Like, that's another, or Safe, those are like really exciting, extreme characters that you can watch unfold through the film that maybe have like a big campy side to them too, which I love. I love how you can wed that realism with the campy, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Are you a campy or extravagant main character in your own life relating to these characters who
I guess
are
maybe
in their stories of fiction?
I was, my instinct was to say, no, not at all. But, I was voted Miss Most Eccentric in high school, and people say I'm a character.
Oh, okay. You're a character. You get that? Like, Stewart's such a character.
I guess I do. I don't see myself that way, but I'm not, that's what my friends say. Yeah, that's what people say. I'm a little bit of a liar and a provocateur and,
Well, okay, a little. I feel like a little bit of a liar is a great place to. Have you always been a little bit of a liar, or is that something you've really grown into and honed as a skill as you've come into your adulthood?
Well, I think making films, you're a little bit of a liar because you're kind of.
Oh, that's a fair point.
Exaggerate because I'm pretty sure people don't get. Like the truth doesn't justify the feeling, so I just add little flourishes to make you feel what I'm trying to get you to feel.
Well, and I normally I feel like we're coming toward the end of time, and normally I would ask a all encapsulating sort of wrap up question that would work on. But the thing I've just wanted to bring up the entire time I haven't been able to is that this is my favorite role that I've seen Hari Nef get yet.
Oh yeah.
And I wanted to hear from you about just giving her a part that feels like it actually taps into the range of what she can do. I feel like I get Hari Nef in sound bites in roles, but this feels like a full fucking character. And I've seen you in interviews talk about how she's, let's say on set, let me be your Shelley Duvall.
Oh my God, yeah.
And I wanted to hear about the underutilized acting presence that is Hari Nef and working with her.
I'm glad you bring her up because I think of Hari Nef. Hari Nef is a leading lady. She is a dramatist. She could be, I've said this, her secret power is she can access pain and break my heart. And she's just so smart and funny that she does that first. And so I think people see that first because she can kind of run circles around people. She's one of those smartest people in the room, funniest people. But if you just strip that away, you're left with this real raw talent and who can really access pain. I really want to see her do a drama and be the lead.
Yeah, and obviously it was she had a big part in Assassination Nation, but there's sort of so much going on in that movie. It becomes sort of less about the people and the performances than it does about sort of the concept and the style of it, as so often is the case with that creator's work. But this was something where I was like, oh wow, this is I feel like if this can be a precursor to a next iteration of roles that Hari Nef gets offered that she can take advantage of, I would be extremely excited.
Oh yeah, me too. I mean, I had powerhouse actors in the film.
Yeah, there is so much movies about friends who hate each other. That is one of my favorite genres is movies about friends who hate each other. You get a lot of that in the 2000s in horror. It's Sorority Row, it's Cry Wolf, Bodies, Bodies, Bodies last year, a movie about friends who hate each other. I feel like Abigail's Party, a movie about acquaintances who have contempt for each other. And just I want to hear from you as somebody, like you said, it's sort of managing characters, making a movie all about connections underneath the surface that just roil up and ruin people's lives. Because also, canonically queer, going on a trip with all of your exes and your friends in tow and your friends who are your exes and being like, what could possibly go wrong?
Well, that's my life. And I guess I wouldn't say it's
the queer experience.
I guess I never thought of it as being, friends who hate each other. They love each other. That's the problem.
Yeah.
There's too much love going on. So that's it. That's the source of the problems.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't you're not going to feel that much at a person or about a person or be that angry at a person if you don't deeply problematically love them.
Yeah.
And yeah, I feel like, in the Buñuel aspect of it too, I thought of Exterminating Angel while I was watching Abigail's Party, and just a room filled with people who either assume too much or know too much about each other to ever have had a nice time that day. Like, no matter what was going to happen, that whether they died in the dining room or they end up, like, Beverly is adulterating her husband, like, off to the side, like she's trying to hook up with Tony on, like, the makeshift dance floor.
I love that part.
And just, like, the amount of times in your movie that someone's like, why are you with her? That, like, and I could be talking about any number of hers in this film. It's like, guys, did you really think this weekend was going to go off without a hitch regardless of ghosts?
I know.
The ghosts are the least of your problems here.
You know, I think creating, you know, a family outside your biological family, your chosen family, is also going to be a family. And it's a topic that's interesting me, and it needs to be navigated. And it isn't just, you know, Hari and I would talk about this like a lot. It's not just going to immediately be a utopia.
Yeah.
And I would say that, like, just tying it back to Abigail's Party, you know, Abigail's Party is known as a movie about class, and it absolutely is. But there's also this kind of punk way that the movie just is heading towards dread. And then when he finally dies at the end, how long and gruesome that is, and the breathing.
Oh, God.
And it reminds me of, you know, another film that I thought of for this fat girl, or it reminds me of horror, and just like that daring to, you know, I love horror that is wedded in character and discomfort and dread and melancholy instead of adrenaline fear. And I think that that's also why I have a relationship to this film.
I think leaving it on that note is the way that we'll cap it off. Dread and fear and your compulsion toward experiencing and then creating that kind of art. Stewart Thorndike, thank you so much for a rather sprawling conversation and for allowing it to go off the main river into its various tributaries.
Just following your brain. I loved it. Thank you.
Thank you so much again to Stewart Thorndike for coming on. Bad Things is out tomorrow on Shudder and AMC Plus, so do check that out. Support independent cinema. And if you haven't seen Lyle, it's streaming all over, including on Canopy and Tubi. All you need for Canopy is a library card, and you get access to actually a pretty impressive catalog of films, I think possibly including A24's list of titles. So yeah, there's great stuff on Canopy, actually. We don't talk about it enough. Go check out Canopy. And if you're curious about Abigail's Party, you can find that currently on the Criterion channel. And now, my one quick thing before I go. Theater Camp. Theater Camp, what a little gem of a movie. If you are of the subset of people out there who knows that Waiting for Guffman is the true pinnacle of Christopher Guest movies, and that Spinal Tap is great, and so is Best in Show, but actually, it all comes down to Waiting for Guffman. If you ever did theater in front of or behind the curtain, if you've ever been gay, then Theater Camp is a movie for you. It was so much fun seeing Theater Camp in a movie theater, because if you are like, I need to go see this while it's still on a big screen, you're going to have a good time. If you're somebody who's like, I need to prioritize getting to Theater Camp in a cinema, you know exactly what you're going for, and you're going to get it, and you're going to have a great time. You will get the jokes. You will understand the kids. Maybe you were one of those kids when you were little. Maybe you're still one of those kids now, and you just grew up a little bit. This movie finally bought me into Ben Platt's whole deal, because he's making fun of his whole deal. And you're like, all right, Ben, great job. Him and Molly Gordon, real life friends, their entire lives. There is archive footage of them performing on stages when they were children together, intercut in the movie at points where it makes sense. She co-directed the film. She co-wrote the film. Her and Ben Platt, obviously longtime friends. His fiance, Noah Galvin, is in it as the long-suffering put-upon stage manager, who is teaching the art of stagecraft to the children who couldn't get into the dance class because it was simply too packed already. It's endearing. It is funny. The cast is fantastic. Jimmy Tetro, guys, I have such a crush on him. He is like, he's just, what a hottie. How is that man? How is that man so appealing? Listen, Patty Harrison's great. The aforementioned cast is great. Amy Sedaris pops up briefly. She's great. The children in this movie are great. Have a joyful time with the theater friends in your life and watch this movie. And if you've never met a theater kid or you never were one yourself, take the anthropological journey of watching theater camp and learn a little something about the people who maybe you grew up playing sports, maybe you grew up shy and just didn't have anything to do with performance. But it is a film of jokes. It is a film of musical numbers. It is a film of understanding. I cried through the finale. And not because it's treacly, but because it is sentiment perfectly executed with like satire. And you can't just please, like, we support independent cinema, but we also support nepotism children making good movies with the access and connections and experience they have. This is how you are a great child of the industry. Take the resources at your disposal and make cool shit. And we will just be happy to have you. We will be glad you use those resources to the best of your ability and to the greatest of our enjoyment. So thank you, industry children, for making theater camp. Everybody's out here watching Barbenheimer, but this little movie that could, I really want you to go out and see it. And I think you're going to have a great time. And that is our show. You can follow us at Feeling Seen Pod or send us an email at feelingseen@maximumfun.org. If you want to follow me, I'm Jor Crew on Twitter. Our theme music is by Andrew Eapen. This show is produced by Marissa Flaxbart. Our senior producers are Kevin Ferguson and Laura Swisher, and this is a production of Maximum Fun.
Maximum Fun,
a worker-owned network
of artist-owned shows,
supported directly by you.